where literacy evolves with technology and language proficiency. This is the Multiliterate Mind Podcast with Dr. Liza Trejo and Marnina Falk-Coleman.
Hello, and welcome to the Multiliterate Mind. I'm Dr. Liza Trejo, and I'm joined by my colleague, Marnina Falk-Coleman.
So good to be back on here podcasting, Liza.
Hi, Marnina. Together, we are exploring how language proficiency, multiliteracy, and human connection are evolving in an AI-driven world. We are so excited to welcome our guests today, Dr. Ryan Allen and Tom Welch, to talk about facilitated interdependent language learning, or FIL. If you tuned in to episode 1, you might have heard David mentioning them, and we can't wait to dig deeper today.
Welcome to the podcast, Ryan and Tom. We are so excited to have you join us.
Well,
Thanks.
thanks for having us. Great
We're
to be
excited
here
to talk
and nice
about
to meet you
Phil.
folks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, before we dive into the great conversation, I just want to give our listeners a bit of background about you. So I'll kick it off to Liza for that.
Okay, so Dr. Ryan Allen is a high school teacher and researcher focused on how artificial intelligence can personalize language learning for adolescents. We also have Tom Welch, who is a lifelong educator and innovator. He's a former Kentucky Teacher of the Year and high school principal. Tom is known for his bold, learner-centered leadership. He's a leader in the National Council of State Supervisors for Languages, and he champions a shift from schooling to true learning. So we have some really incredible guests with us today, right, fellows? So together, Ryan and Tom have developed facilitated interdependent language learning, a model that empowers students to choose any language they wish to study and earn graduation credit based on demonstrated proficiency rather than seat time.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to learn about Phil. Before we get into the details of it, I would love to hear a bit about your stories. So how language learning, teaching, or research led you to this work and ultimately to beginning this approach.
Ryan, go ahead.
Sure. So I first heard about Phil in about 2018, 2019 at a conference for Delaware World Language Teachers. And I heard about it in the lens of it's a course where students can pick any language that they want to learn. And as soon as I heard about it, I knew that it was something that I wanted to bring to Del Mar. We're traditionally a Spanish-only world language department, and my students had often asked me, why can't we learn French? Why can't we learn German? Their peers across Delaware have access to these languages. And so when I heard about it, I thought, okay, this is something I need to work on. And again, that was about 2018, 2019. COVID happened. It's kind of set us back a little bit. And then maybe like 2023, Dr. Fulkerson at the state of Delaware had asked if there was any teachers that wanted to kind of get together, form a group to learn more about Phil and actually really look at bringing it to our district. And that's when I first met Tom. It was May 2023. I was in year 3 of my doctoral program. I had to start writing my literature review, and I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to write it on at that point. And then it was such a serendipitous moment. I met Tom, and he was talking about using ChatGPT for language learning, and he was showing us how you could use it to generate dialogues and use it as a conversation partner. And it clicked for me, like not only is Phil really not just possible, but also pedagogically sound. At that moment, for me, it was also like, okay, this is what I'm doing my dissertation on. And so we worked for the rest of that school year. And then the following school year, I pitched it to my admin. We're a very small rural district in southern Delaware. And so there was really only 2 admin that I had to pitch it to. And, I've for a while been sort of this crazy mad scientist bringing ideas to them. Sometimes they're way outlandish and sometimes they're, more feasible. This one was definitely one of the more outlandish ones. The first thing that my curriculum director said was, you're going to teach Chinese, but you don't actually know Chinese. And I had to admit, hey, you're right, but I think it can work. And luckily, they had the foresight and the wisdom to trust me. And here we are now. We're in the second year of Phil. So that's how I got started with it. But I'll throw it back to Tom. He's been thinking about Phil a lot longer than I have.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks. And Ryan, it's been so great to work with you. And, the way I got to Phil actually was a pretty long road. I was a horrible language student when I was in high school. And then even in college, I tell people my worst grades in college were in French, and that's what I ended up teaching. But I dropped out of college when I was a junior, and I spent several months digging ditches in the south of France, and it
Oh, wow.
changed my life. I came back thinking, oh, now I understand why people want to learn a language. They want to be able to communicate. But all of the time I've been an educator, I've always been dissatisfied with the way the learning situation is set up for kids. Because I knew I was a fairly intelligent guy and I could learn another language, but it just didn't fit with the structure of school. So over the course of my career, I've been really focused on how do we do the right thing for learners. And Phil actually grew out of that commitment. And it's not my idea. It actually was a group idea from a small group of us in the NACESFL organization, the National Council of State Supervisors for Languages. And we started working together, meeting weekly since 2019. And as we worked, we began to find out about other things that were going on around the country. And initially, we saw in the ACTFL Central postings about a teacher in California at a charter school who was looking for all sorts of different language tutors for a language lab, he called it. So we contacted him and got some great ideas from him. And then we found out from one of our colleagues in NACESFL about a program that's been going on for over 10 years now in the state of Wisconsin, referred to as FLS, Facilitated Language Studies. So we contacted the teachers involved with that, started to take a close look. And as we worked with that and did our own research and dug in some other directions, the idea for Phil finally came to pull together. And it was it's been the most exciting thing I have worked on in my entire educational career, not
Wow.
just as a
Wow.
language teacher, but as a teacher and also as an administrator, because frankly, the number of problems for an administrator that it solves are also really, really numerous. And so I get up every single day excited about working with Phil and on Phil, with folks like Ryan, with my colleagues in the neural network of NACESFL, and it's been extremely rewarding now as we've seen the results of what we thought could happen actually being validated by the work that Ryan's been doing.
Well, your
I
enthusiasm is palpable. And so I'm sure our listeners are wanting to hear even more, as am I. And I mean, you said it's how many problems it solves. I'm curious, can you enumerate on that a little bit further? Like
Oh,
what
sure.
type, I mean, I have some ideas myself, but I mean, could you enumerate?
Yeah, I can give you a couple of quick examples. First of all, though, maybe I can frame Phil, if you can understand it as a way to help kids or adults eventually increase their language proficiency by organizing around learning and not around courses. So traditionally, we've always looked at language programs as Spanish 1, French 2, German 3, whatever it might be. And so the learning that kids were supposed to do was organized around those courses. But with Phil, we've been able to organize it around the learner. Now, the way that solves some administrative problems is we know that there are many programs that start out with huge enrollments in level 1 and level 2, oftentimes because of a graduation or a college entrance requirement. And then what happens is they drop off. Now, in a language like Spanish, which is the strongest language for foreign language in the country, it's not too much of a problem to sustain those languages later. But as you go on, especially the smaller the school, the more difficult it becomes to sustain those languages. So as an administrator, I would be looking at, gosh, I've got a German 3 course, and I've only got 12 kids who are going to be able to take it at the right time for me to be able to offer it. So it's
Mhm.
what, as an administrator, we referred to as singletons. So
Right.
those singleton courses were a nightmare because, Maria wants to take German 3, but she also needs to take physics, and that's at the same time. So what do you do? Well, with Phil, it's a very easy solution because I really believe that the most important thing going on in a classroom is the relationship between the teacher or the facilitator, as we refer to folks like Ryan, the facilitator and the learner. And so for Ryan, for instance, it's like, oh, I don't have to have Maria fifth period for German 3. She can come to me in my Phil class anytime because I'm not going to be teaching a course. I'm going to be helping her learn the language. And you'll perhaps hear us talk about use some vocabulary that is very specific. First of all, we talk about learners and not students, because for me, a student is somebody who responds to instruction. These these learners in Phil aren't responding to instruction. There is really no traditional instruction. They're learning through a very particular structure that Ryan and the can-do statements provide, but it's quite different. I don't know. That's probably, you can ask me some other things. Other things that administratively it might solve is languages. And that's one thing Ryan asked. I graduated from a high school in central Nebraska, a great school. It now has 2,500 students. When I was there, when they had 1,700 students, we had 5 languages. Now, today, with 2,500 students, 1 language.
Wow. Is that
And
partially the teacher shortage as well?
it's partly teacher shortage, and frankly, you know what? I think it's just easier, right? It's just
Mhm.
easier to offer
Mhm.
one language. And yet, that may be what the administrators want, but kids want to learn other languages. Kids
Mhm.
don't want to take language courses, they want to learn languages, right?
I
And
love
so
that.
with
And
with Phil, any language for which there is an assessment is one that we can help them gain proficiency in. All right, go on.
I love that. I know you've touched on the approach a little bit. I would love to hear from Ryan a little bit more about how this actually works. What do you actually do? What does it look like in action? Kind of describing that approach that Tom just alluded to a little bit for our listeners to learn more how it works on the day to day.
Sure. Yeah, and the term approach is a good one because Tom is very specific. It's not a model, it's not a method, because it can really take whatever form it needs to take in any district. And kind of talking about the challenges that districts face. For us at Del Mar, it works for us because again, it opens up that language access. It fits nicely in the master schedule. And when we first offered it, the incoming freshmen of the 24-25 school year was our target demographic. We wanted to offer it to the freshmen so that they would have the most time with it as high school students. And so that's what works for us, but that might not be that might not be the challenge that every district is facing. If you have a large heritage speaking population, but you don't offer the language that is their heritage language, and they want to try to improve their proficiency in that language, then Phil is a good option for that. So, kind of piggybacking off of what Tom was saying, it creates answers for so many different problems that admin face. And focusing on the approach. So, when I first started the course at the beginning of last school year, I knew that I was going to really lean heavily into the necessful, aptful, can-do statements. It's something that I'm familiar with. I knew that we were going to be using a proficiency test at the end of the semester in order to give the students their validation. We're very fortunate in Delaware in that it's in the graduation requirement code. It's written that students either need 2 courses, 2 credits in one language, or demonstrated proficiency of novice high or greater in a particular language. So that for us was the route that, that was sort of the foundation for the Phil course. If the students could take the STAMP test and show that they were novice high or higher, then that got them their graduation requirement. So I knew those things going into it. I knew that I was going to be leaning heavily on AI. ChatGPT for the content generation, something like naturalreaders.com for the text to speech, Notebook LM, the Google product for the podcast feature, which now handles a bunch of different languages. So I had the tools, I had the framework, and really since the beginning of the pilot, it's been sort of a work in progress of refining exactly what the approach looks like. I went into this teaching 10 languages with no curriculum. I had learners that were hungry to learn the languages. As Tom had mentioned, the learners want to learn languages. And we required an application process just to really hammer home the fact that the students needed to demonstrate proficiency in order to get their graduation requirement. They didn't get it based on seat time. They actually needed to perform. And so we used the application not as a gatekeeper because we accepted all of the students that had submitted a completed application, but really to just let them know what they were getting themselves into here.
Ryan, can I jump in real quickly to talk about that? Because I think that was an important part of the success that you've had with Phil. I was talking with an administrator who's interested in Phil in Colorado recently, and he said, the main mistake that we've made with our innovation center is we assume kids are going to be much more self-motivated than it ends up that they are. Well, with Phil, especially the way Ryan has orchestrated it, there are a couple of things that work with that. One is the application process, because we don't ever want to put a kid in a situation where they're not ready to be successful. So to put a student into a Phil classroom where they have no experience being a self-learner would be morally wrong on our part. We just shouldn't do that. So that's why you don't just want to sign up every kid for Phil. It's not an alternative to a regular requirement like that. But that could be demonstrated ability as a learner. Maybe they taught themselves a musical instrument. Maybe they learned how to video edit. Maybe they learned a whole bunch of skateboarding tricks on their own watching YouTube. Something where they've demonstrated that they were a learner and weren't just always waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. The second thing, and it's really important, I think, is the proficiency-based credit. So Ryan mentioned kids don't get a credit in Phil just by showing up and completing the required seat time. They have to demonstrate that proficiency. And when they know that, it makes a huge difference. And it's just amazing what that does as well, because kids also, it's not a hard struggle to help kids understand that there's a direct line between the amount of time you spend learning a language and your proficiency. So for kids have tremendous agency to increase their proficiency at the rate that's right for them at whatever particular month they're in, or, whatever their other schedule things are, but they know that it's up to them. It just brings so many things together that are educationally sound as well as linguistically sound.
So it puts the ownership on them and also tailors to their needs and their experience as a learner.
Language proficiency isn't a single moment, it's a journey.
At Avant, we support the entire proficiency cycle, from learning to assessing real-world language use, to certifying skills that open doors beyond the classroom. Our connected platform gives educators clear data, less guesswork, and meaningful ways to recognize what learners can truly do with language.
If you're looking for a better way to support growth, from first practice to verified proficiency, visit avantlanguage.com.
Avant, the language proficiency company.
So you have the can-do statements and you have the tools. What do you do from there? What does a lesson look like? How do you facilitate it?
Sure. Really quick, I want to go back to the application just to make a point. Yesterday, I took my current Phil students down to the 8th grade hallway to talk about Phil, to hand out the applications. And just like last year, we started getting applications back the very same day.
Wow.
So to really show that the learners are interested in this. getting to pick the language. So what does the approach look like? What does the lesson planning look like? So I don't really plan lessons. That's the student's job, the learner's job at this point.
Wow.
Outside of class, I spend a lot of time trying to curate materials, trying to find some target language books to make a nice print-rich environment, experimenting with AI in order to come up with some new cool approaches, kind of prompt engineering, figuring out prompts that the learners can use to help them with their learning. And so in class, uh, I start every week by giving students a weekly goal sheet. And the first thing they do with their weekly goal sheet is they select their focal topic. And I give them, the Avant website has a list of topics by proficiency level. So you can see, like, if you're planning on getting novice high, these are the topics that maybe you want to focus on, intermediate and advanced. And so I give that to the learners, not as a mandate, but as a guide to say, if you're new to the language, here are some good entry points to the language learning. But really, it's up to the learners how they want to learn each of those topics. And I'll share a quick story. So I have 3 Japanese learners at the moment. And the one Monday, they said that they wanted to work on colors and shapes that particular week. And I thought to myself, colors and shapes the whole week, I don't know if you're going to get the whole week's worth of activities just doing colors and shapes, because we meet every day. We have 90-minute blocks.
Oh, wow.
I figured colors and shapes, maybe the first day you can figure out the vocab, work on the pronunciation, but then where do you go with it? And so I asked the students, what is it that you want to do with colors and shapes? And that's a question that I find myself asking them a lot. What do you want to do with the language? And really getting them to use the language of proficiency and those can-do statements. And so the students said, I want to be able to talk about Minecraft in Japanese. And it was sort of an aha moment. It was, okay, so colors and shapes isn't your focal topic. Minecraft is your focal topic. And through Minecraft, you're going to learn about colors and shapes. And as soon as he was just like, oh my goodness, I can learn about Minecraft? That's crazy. The other students around him realized he's going to be learning about Minecraft in Japanese. The other 2 Japanese learners, guess what they wanted to do that week? They picked Minecraft as their focal topic. Then one of the French learners heard them, who was sitting nearby, and said, I'm also going to learn about Minecraft in French. And so here we had 3 Japanese learners, 1 French learner, all doing Minecraft. So they picked their focal topic, and then they identify 3 can-do goals for the end of the week. By the end of the week, I want to be able to, insert interpretive goal, presentational goal, interpersonal, intercultural, for whatever their target proficiency level is. And it's important for them to articulate, what the different proficiency levels look like. Novice high, they're using simple sentences. Intermediate low, they're using sentences with some added detail, and so on. So they're using the can-do statements as models in order to kind of craft their 3 goals for the week that are aligned with their focal topic. So at the beginning of the week, I'm looking for a solid focal topic. I'm looking for alignment between the can-do statements and the focal topic, alignment across their can-do goals, just to make sure that they work well together. And learners need some scaffolding in this process, right? A lot of the times I'll see learners who are new to Phil pick a focal topic such as communication. Or conversation. I want to be able to have a conversation in the target language. Okay, well, on what topic? Like, at what level? We have to try to make that a little more specific, again, using the language of proficiency. So then once they have their 3 can-do goals, we'll brainstorm activities for the week. And we've been using ChatGPT for this a lot lately, just because ChatGPT has been doing a great job of coming up with activities. I'll have the learners type into ChatGPT, hello, I'm a novice Japanese learner. My focal topic for the week is focal topic. By the end of the week, I want to be able to, they type their 3 can-do goals. Please generate a Monday through Friday plan of activities designed to help me reach my goals by the end of the week. And it comes up with some great stuff. Monday's usually the vocab day, using it in some different contexts. And then Tuesday is typically, okay, how can we take those words and put them into some phrases? And then throughout the week, it comes up with some great activities across the different modes of communication. So then I use that sort of to help hold them accountable throughout the week. If there's a learner who appears off task or unsure what to do next, I'll ask to see their weekly goal sheet. I try to have them have it on their desk each and every class throughout class, just to make sure that they're where they said that they would be. And that's such a strong motivational factor. The fact that they selected the activities, it's no longer, hey, you need to be working on what I asked you to work on. Instead, it's, hey, you need to be working on what you told me you were going to work on.
Mhm.
So looking for alignment between the activities, their use of class time. And then at the end of the week, I'll have them submit a piece of evidence for each of their 3 goals to show I reached my goal or I came close to my goal. And then they'll reflect on their learning throughout the week. If they didn't reach their goals, I ask them to reflect on why that is. Was the goal to was it too much for one week, or what happened? And so it's a lot of reflection at the end of the week and planning for the following week. But this kind of recursive process of topic, can do statement, activities, and then working towards reaching their goals.
I
No.
love that you're
Oh,
teaching
Yeah.
them prompting. You're teaching them
Mhm.
goal setting. You're teaching them evidence. You're teaching them how to be a language learner, how to find language resources. You're teaching so many skills as well as language. It's incredible what these kids are going to be leaving with beyond their language proficiency. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna add, like, I can't stop smiling. I feel now, Tom, why you're saying this is the most exciting thing you've done in your educational career, because I'm like ticking off in my educator brain all of the pedagogically sound practice that's happening here, and I'm thinking about all this talk and all of this theorizing we've been doing about AI and what it's gonna do and how it's going to cause all these problems. There's been so much, naysaying about AI along with but this is showing me, and I'm not the naysayer. I think it's obviously it has its, there's possibility for bad, but it obviously has such great potential for growth. And I'm a couple of things I was just really caught my attention, Ryan, when you were talking. One was you've said prompt engineering, and for teachers or administrators or anyone who's not familiar with AI yet, who haven't been using ChatGPT a lot outside of like revise my email or whatever, could you talk maybe a tiny bit more about what prompt engineering is and how that's helpful for students? I mean, I think you explained like a little bit how it's helpful for them, but could you just talk a tiny bit more about that? And then I had one more follow-up question.
Sure. Yeah, in short, thinking about what to say to ChatGPT in order to get the best possible output. Kind of like how they talk about in research, garbage in, garbage out. If you give ChatGPT sort of a vague, broad prompt, you're going to get a vague, broad response. And so figuring out, what are the best prompts that you can use. And it goes back to my dissertation work. The dissertation that I did was I used ChatGPT to generate personalized stories for my Spanish 2 learners. And so I had a lot of practice testing out different prompts, trying to find like a good workflow of kind of copying, pasting the prompt in order to get a story that was about 500 words that aligned with their interests, their experiences. And so that I guess is my main experience in kind of thinking about prompt engineering and again, what to say. And just kind of to note on that really quick, I found that the learners who read the personalized ChatGPT generated stories, I had one class of Spanish 2 learners that read the personalized stories versus another class of students that read like chapters from leveled readers, which is typically what I would give to the lower proficiency learners. The students that read the personalized stories, I found that they demonstrated higher retelling scores. They enjoyed the stories significantly more. But not just that, they could do more with the stories. It turned out that the personalized stories were more linguistically complex, but because they were so rooted in the learner's experiences, they got so much more out of them, engaged with them on a such deeper level. So
My literacy
use
brain is going crazy right now. My whole background is in literacy, and a big part of the conversation right now is background knowledge and how comprehension is so much more heavily dependent on specific text and student background knowledge than researchers ever thought
right.
previously. And so, like, to me, that's such a great example of that.
And the aesthetic stance, like mine was rooted in the transactional theory a lot, and so Rosenblatt spoke a lot about the aesthetic stance, and so just being able to connect to the characters, largely because in a lot of the cases the characters in the story were the students themselves or their friends or just so closely related to them that I'm getting a little off topic here, but yeah, going back to the prompt engineering, figuring out which AI model is the right one to use for which scenario. And so we'll use ChatGPT a lot for the brainstorming, for the creative writing, for dialogues, conversations, and then figuring out, okay, well, ChatGPT, we know that it gives us inaccurate information sometimes, so maybe that's not the best one. If we're trying to find something that's incredibly factual, for that, we would use maybe something like Perplexity or cross-reference ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google, if we're trying to find something very specific. I noticed that Tom raised his hand, so I'll stop talking.
Well, all I was going to say is, sometimes when we're initially talking about Phil with teachers, language teachers think, oh, you're trying to replace me as a language teacher. Or, we saw this same sort of thing when schools were bringing Duolingo in and just having every kid sit in class. After listening to Ryan, you can understand this is not just bring in somebody who doesn't know about language. This isn't bring in somebody to just watch over the class while the kids are doing something on their own. No, Ryan is a skilled language teacher, even though I don't like the word teacher, but he's
Educator.
a language educator. Thank you, Ryan, who knows how to help kids increase proficiency. And I think from a pedagogical point of view, the tools that he's bringing together, the resources, the knowledge background, the research is so much more able to flourish in the Phil environment than it is in a traditional regular classroom. And I love the way even some of his experiences with Phil are bleeding over into his regular Spanish class, because he teaches regular Spanish and then he teaches a Phil class, which is quite different as well. And one other thing I was going to say is, I always have one other thing I always want to talk about.
That's okay.
As educators, we know the research says mistake making is part of the learning process. It's an essential part of the learning process. You don't learn if you're not making mistakes. And yet, we've never had a system in school where we could accommodate that, where we could give value to that mistake making. Well, with Phil, we use what's called an asset-based assessment approach as opposed to a deficit-based. So, kids don't want to speak in class because they're afraid they'll make a mistake and the teacher will hear them or somebody else will hear them. Ryan doesn't care how many mistakes they make. The mistakes are only a way for him to help them realize, here's what you need to do if you're going to reach your goal, because those mistakes are keeping you back from your goal. So there's no counting off for mistakes. It's all asset-based, and that fits in with that proficiency model as well.
I love that you said, I used to always tell my students, like, first of all, if you made no mistakes, I'd have no job. And second of all, how do you learn if you don't make mistakes that you can learn from? I was like, never apologize. Thank you for making a mistake. And thank you for teaching the kids also how to use AI, because that's going to be essential in any career in the future. To know how to prompt, to know how to vet information and ideas, and know when they're good or bad. I'm wondering, I know you've showed all the strengths, but I don't want to paint this picture like it's been perfect and easy and a cakewalk and nothing goes wrong. I'd love to hear a bit about some of the challenges that you've had to learn from, especially if someone's looking to take this on. Kind of, it can be defeatist to think that it's so easy and just go do it tomorrow. But it has taken a lot of time, research, and intentionality. So what are some of the biggest challenges you've kind of navigated with this to get to where you are?
Sure. So thinking back to last year's pilot class, it was definitely some growing pains for myself as well as for the students, especially considering the fact that they're freshmen. Even though they're very dedicated to language learning, they're still adolescents, and they're better at their languages than I am, which is interesting because they're the expert in their language, but in the classroom, I'm the expert in language learning. And so trying to find that balance of supporting the learner, giving the learner space to grow, but also trying to help them recognize if they're doing something that's not pedagogically sound. And one specific example that comes to my mind is I had a few learners who really gravitated toward using Duolingo and only Duolingo. And don't get me wrong, I love Duolingo. I have an almost 500-day streak in Duolingo, but it's it by itself is not enough. And so I tried to communicate this to those learners, and they made it abundantly clear that they were not interested in what I had to say. And considering Tom's advice, one of the first guiding principles of Phil is ultimate respect for the learner. So I said, okay, I will respect their decision, and if they just want to do Duolingo, then they're just going to do Duolingo. And what I found at the end of the first semester of Phil is that the students who really only used Duolingo did not score as well on the STAMP test as the learners who integrated a wider variety of strategies. And that was particularly true with the speaking. So that was one challenge. Another challenge, again, goes back to finding the balance of whole group instruction versus the interdependent learning. What amount of me communicating something that I felt every learner needed to understand and be able to articulate, what's the right balance of that with them working on their own? And so one thing that I tried to do in the first semester of Phil was give them sort of choice boards that were designed to get them using each of the modes of communication, as well as intercultural, something for reading, something for speaking, listening, writing, every week. And the learners kind of very, very loudly said that they didn't like those choice boards. Every week that I gave them one, it was always like another one of these. And to me, it seemed like it was giving them options. And I was hearing from the learners, I was hearing that they wanted both more flexibility and less structure, but they also wanted more structure. And I was hearing this from the same students. How can you want more structure and less structure at the same time? And it took me a while to think through that and I try to figure out exactly what that meant. And what I think they were asking for is that they wanted more structured use of time, but more flexibility in how they used that time. And so that's something that I tried to bring into the second semester of Phil, where throughout the week, I have a few instances where we already kind of pre-planned what it is that we're doing. At the beginning of class on Monday is sort of when we share some recognitions, where we talk about what's going well, what's not going well. We'll share out some creative uses of AI. Then every Wednesday, I started doing a Wednesday writing workshop, the WWW, where at the beginning of every class on Wednesday, we were going to do some kind of writing activity. Then Thursday was the interpersonal Thursday, interpersonal and unplugged. No technology. We're just going to sit with our language peers and talk in the target language. We're going to share what our goals are to kind of bounce ideas off one another. So adding those kind of structured events and then also implementing the weekly goal sheet, that kind of came through thinking of, okay, they want structured use of time, but they want to choose how they use their time. So I stopped doing the choice boards. And, in hindsight, looking back on it, that was still me telling them what to do. They had a choice of activities, but I was still the one that was picking those activities. This kind of puts the ball more in their court. They get to choose the activities, and I'm just kind of helping them refine those activities.
Marnie, we would never suggest to somebody that they just try it, right? Just jump. You'll feel
Yeah.
like you're jumping in, but really the neural network group from Necessful really is very anxious to work with state supervisors or district coordinators or individual teachers to really make sure that they are ready before they dive into Phil. Because just in the same way that we would never want to put a learner into a situation where they weren't ready to succeed, it would be very irresponsible to suggest to a teacher, oh, you don't need any prep, just go ahead and do this.
I love
But-
that you make that point. That was a good. How do
Yeah.
you compensate for that? So you have multiple learners that are learning the same language, so they can talk to each other.
Mhm.
What does that cultural education look like if they're not engaging? If they're independently engaging, I guess, because you mentioned that.
Yeah, so that comes into play when we are setting our can-do goals. Each week, in addition to linguistic goals, I have them set some kind of cultural goal, depending on what their focal topic is. If they're focusing on clothing, for example, we talk about the products, practices, and perspectives all the time, the 3 Ps of culture. And so if they're talking about clothing, perhaps they set a goal of what are some cultural products that folks in France wear to the beach that differs from what we would do here, things like that. as well as the perspectives. Why is it that they do that? What is the difference in values across the cultures? And so we bake that into the can-do statements that we set, and then work towards that throughout the week. And then by the end of the week, they ought to be able to articulate some of those three Ps. Additionally, one of the things that we'll do is, and this kind of started, I noticed one of my French learners who was watching a YouTube video of an English-speaking woman who was talking about like self-care. It was geared toward like adolescent girls. I thought to myself, okay, she was watching it, listening to it in English, but reading the subtitles in French. And so I was like, let's pull up Perplexity. And I had her type in something like, what are some French language YouTube channels for a target audience of teenagers that deals with self-care? So finding the YouTube channels, the podcasts that are in the target language meant for target language users, things like that.
And I know we're Ryan and I are really enthusiastic about Phil, obviously. But I want to make sure that people have a chance to hear about the results that Ryan had, because I want you to remember that in Delaware, it's 2 courses is the requirement, right? And that normally takes kids on a traditional schedule 2 years, or in a block schedule 2 courses like Spanish 1, Spanish 2. Ryan, talk for a minute about the results, even from your first year with your Phil student.
Sure. Yeah. So during the pilot semester, over half of the learners earned their 2-year requirement in one semester, meaning that they demonstrated
Oh my
at least,
goodness.
so at least novice high or higher for those. And the ones who missed earning credits did not miss it by much. It was usually just one section. They got one level too low in. But the great thing about Phil is that the learning doesn't have to stop at the end of the semester, because we're not all on the same train moving at the same pace. The learners are kind of each taking their own trains interdependently. And so a number of the learners that missed the score the first time at the end of the semester continued on their own, retested in the spring, earning their graduation requirement then. So that was really a great thing to see. It really kind of reshapes what assessment means, right? It wasn't a punitive measure at the end of the semester that they had to do well on, and they all were taking the same one, right? They got to pick their language. They therefore picked the assessment. It served more as a snapshot as to where they were at that moment. And then fast forward to the current semester, we're kind of wrapping up the test now. Scores are coming in. You see me throughout the day. I'm at my computer kind of constantly clicking refresh to see if there's any more scores in. And the learners come to me and they ask, like, what did I get? Not necessarily because they were nervous about how they did, but because they wanted to know, like, did I demonstrate, what proficiency level did I demonstrate that day? So I want to tell a really quick story about a junior who was in Phil this semester, who she got put into Phil. She had already gotten her language requirement, but I guess she needed a course. So she was in Phil, and she chose Portuguese as her language. And she was the only Portuguese learner in the class, even though there was 3 heritage Portuguese speakers that were, able to assist her if she needed. But for whatever reason, like, Portuguese wasn't clicking with her. She didn't really care for the pronunciation. She couldn't wrap her head around the pronunciation. And after the first quarter, like, you could just look at her and tell she was not having a good time. She was ready to drop the class. And so we had a conversation. I told her, hey, listen, if that's what you want to do, I would support it. But hey, maybe Phil, maybe this class isn't the issue. Maybe it's just that you're not meant to learn Portuguese right now. Why don't you try switching to a different language? And I noticed that she kind of, congregated with a few of the ASL learners, the sign language learners. And so I said, hey, give ASL a try, why not? So she switched to ASL after the quarter. So maybe like mid-November, she started working on ASL. And then coming up to winter break, she was a bundle of nerves. Like, she really didn't want to take the stamp test. I told her, I think you should take the stamp test. It doesn't have to destroy your grade if you don't do well, because A, you don't need it to graduate, and B, I understand that you just switched to it. It's okay. But even despite that, like, she was not happy with me for about a month straight. She was very nervous to take the stamp test, ends up taking it. She does the receptive portion of the stamp test. And so I went back and I said, so I know that you really wanted to get novice high. And she's like, that's right. And I said, you did. And her
Oh my
entire being
God.
her entire being just
Yay.
switched. Like
Oh,
she went from, not having the confidence because she started late, and so she felt like she was behind everybody. And as Tom will tell you,
Mhm.
in a Phil class, the learners are where they are, and that's okay. And they don't all have to be at the same spot. So then she did the expressive part where she had to do the signing. And I told her, I said, listen, I know that you really wanted novice high, and I'm sorry to tell you, you didn't get novice high. You got intermediate low. After
I'm
like
tearing up over here. That's
after 2
amazing.
months of teaching
yeah.
herself
Oh.
ASL. And so she went from saying, I don't like ASL, I'm not gonna use it after this, I don't like this class. And I asked her after she got her scores, I said, listen, knowing what you know now, like, does that change what you think about this class and ASL? Like, do you see yourself using it? She said, yeah, I do. And I told her, hey, listen, if you want to come back to Phil next year, I'd be more than happy to have you. And she said that she was considering it. So
That's incredible. Well, I know we're looking towards wrapping up, and I could talk about this for like 3 more
Yeah,
hours with all of you. I have so
amazing.
many
Yeah,
questions.
same.
But I would just love to give our listeners kind of like an ending wrap up, thinking about this is kind of a microscope into what the future of language education can even be. What we're looking at as we're teaching with these digital tools, with AI, with tailored education, all the things you're talking about, kind of what gives you hope? What does this show us that we can look forward to in language education? Because I think also there's a lot of fear around, like Tom mentioned, teachers being replaced or language education becoming kind of less relevant. So what gives you hope, and what do you think this shows us for the future of language learning and multiliteracy based on like Phil as an example of what that could be?
So one that comes to mind for me is the retention of learners in the class beyond the graduation requirement. I think that nationally, it's about 30% of learners continue on beyond completing their graduation requirement. What I'm seeing with my pretty small sample size in Phil is that number is closer to about 90%. The vast, vast, vast majority of learners are continuing with it. And again, like Tom had mentioned, the flexibility that it offers the master schedule is something that I think the administrators, can really get behind. What it can do for heritage learners is something that I think a lot of educators can get behind as well.
I was thinking very much about what it could do for our multilingual learners as well. I mean, I'm thinking about how quickly that student made progress in ASL, and I think about this ongoing concern for students who are trying to learn English in the classroom and are here for years and aren't making progress. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that doesn't have to be the case. So yeah, I see. I'm not even obviously teaching Phil, but just from this brief conversation with you too, I have a million ideas for what I would like for people to do with it. So.
And Tom, what do you see that this shows us about the future of learning, of education, of the role of the teacher, the role of multilingualism, whatever, like, kind of does this show you?
It expands every one of those aspects tremendously. For instance, even multilingualism, we can now actually think about kids in the United States becoming plurilingual, right?
Yes.
Because there's nothing to keep them from layering on languages, for instance, from learning more than one language at once. Yeah, that would be possible. We can't do that structurally. But what we're able to do now, because of the digital tools and other things, we can open up opportunities for learning centered around the learner instead of around courses, and that changes everything. And I think it just opens up so many possibilities for true learning to continue in the future in ways that are very, very different, very exciting, because what's held us back have been structural issues. It's not been teachers. It's been structural issues that now we are able to overcome.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much. And I think that gives a lot of hope for teachers of what their career can be.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining us. As I know Tom mentioned, the Neural Network is a Zoom gathering on Wednesday afternoons. We're going to put both of your contact information in the show notes in case anyone would like to contact you further. And
I
if
would
you're
also suggest that folks may want to get hold of their state supervisor, who also has links to us or might already be involved as well.
Absolutely. Well, just to wrap us up, if any of you were intrigued by something this episode and want to add to this conversation, comment below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this podcast in your networks.
All opinions expressed in this podcast and the comments are solely those of the individual and not necessarily those of Avant.